The desert had a way of swallowing secrets. At sunset, when the sky burned red over the Arizona frontier, even the winds seemed to whisper stories no one dared repeat. That evening, as the last light clung to the cliffs and the shadows grew long across the dry earth, a single question trembled in the air. "Will it hurt? Will you be gentle?" The words were soft, almost lost beneath the cry of a distant hawk, yet they carried more weight than the mountains standing guard over the valley. The young virgin who asked them stood at the edge of two worlds. Behind her lay the fragile remains of a frontier town, its wooden church steeple cracked by dust storms, its saloon doors swinging lazily in the fading heat. Before her stood a warrior of the Apache, silent as stone, watching her with eyes that held both fire and restraint. No one in that town imagined this moment would come. The settlers had always believed their world was separate from the one beyond the ridge. They called it wild land, savage land, as if fear could make it smaller. But the truth was the land belonged to neither side alone. It belonged to the wind, to the river cutting through rock, to the spirits of ancestors whose footsteps still echoed in the canyons. The girl was called Ilawan Grace. Her name carried the softness of prayer and the strength of quiet endurance. Raised by a preacher father who believed in order and obedience, she had grown up listening to sermons about right and wrong, about light and darkness. Yet she had always felt that the world was not so simple. When she stood at the riverbank at dusk, watching the sun sink behind Apache territory, she felt something deeper than fear. She felt longing. Across from her now stood Thunderhawk, a muscular Native American warrior with long black hair and tribal jewelry, always shirtless, with a fit, model-like muscular build, small tribal tattoos, and tribal jewelry around his neck. His presence was commanding yet calm. He did not carry himself like the monsters described in whispered town gossip. He stood tall and steady, as if the earth itself supported him. They had met by accident, or so it seemed. A broken wagon wheel, a runaway horse, a twist of fate in the dry canyon pass. Ilawan had been alone when the horse bolted, her heart racing as the ground rushed beneath her. It was Thunderhawk who caught the reins. It was Thunderhawk who lifted her from the dust as if she weighed nothing at all. In that moment she should have felt terror. That was what she had been taught. Instead, she felt something else, safety, a strange, unsettling safety in the arms of a man she had been warned to fear. Thunderhawk had not spoken much since that day. His English was careful, deliberate, learned through trade and uneasy peace talks, but his silence was not emptiness. It was thoughtfulness. When he looked at Ilawan, it was never with hunger or conquest. It was with curiosity, as though she were a sunrise he had not expected to witness. Rumors spread quickly in a small town. The sheriff, Ironwood Kane, a hard-eyed man who believed strength meant control, had already begun asking questions. He did not trust what he did not understand. To him, Thunderhawk was a threat simply because he existed, but Ilawan knew better. Or at least she believed she did. The desert meetings began quietly. A glance near the trading post, a folded piece of cloth left by the river, a shared silence beneath the cottonwood trees. They spoke of simple things at first, the way the monsoon clouds rolled in from the west, the taste of wild berries, the sound of drums at night. Thunderhawk told her of his people's history, of warriors who defended their land with honor, of mothers who sang lullabies older than the canyon walls. He spoke of respect, of balance, of taking only what was needed. His voice was deep and steady, like distant thunder rolling across open plains. Ilawan listened with wide eyes. No preacher had ever spoken to her about balance. No sermon had ever sounded like this. Yet the world around them tightened like a drawn bowstring. Settlers grew restless. The Apache watched from higher ground. One wrong move could ignite a storm neither side could control. And now, here they stood, alone in the red glow of sunset, at the place where the desert met the river. The air was heavy with something unspoken. Ilawan's hands trembled, though not from cold. She had chosen to come. She had chosen to cross the invisible line drawn by generations of fear. Her question was not only about pain. It was about trust, about surrendering the old stories she had been told, about stepping into a future no one would forgive her for choosing. Thunderhawk stepped closer, slow and deliberate, giving her time to pull away if she wished. The wind lifted his long black hair, and the tribal jewelry around his neck caught the last light of day. His small tribal tattoos traced stories across his skin, symbols of bravery and protection. He reached out but stopped inches from her face, waiting. Always waiting. "Allow and grace," he said quietly, his voice steady. "The river does not hurt the stone. It shapes it with patience." His words settled over her like warm rain. There was strength in him, yes, but there was also gentleness, a power that did not need to prove itself. Behind them, far across the valley, a gunshot cracked the silence. Both turned sharply toward the sound. Smoke rose faintly near the town's edge. Horses whinnied in panic. The fragile peace that had held for months felt as if it were tearing apart. Ironwood Kane had made his move. Thunderhawk's jaw tightened. The warrior returned in his eyes, fierce and protective. He looked at Alawan not as a forbidden love, but as someone in danger. "You cannot stand between two fires," he warned softly, but Alawan did not step back. For the first time in her sheltered life, she felt certain of something. She felt certain of him. Another gunshot echoed closer this time. The desert no longer whispered secrets. It roared with them. Elowen's heart pounded as she reached for Thunderhawk's hand. If she stayed, she would betray her town. If she left, she would abandon her father and everything she had ever known. Either choice would change her forever. Thunderhawk squeezed her fingers once, firm and grounding. The sky darkened from red to deep purple. Shadows swallowed the riverbank. In the distance, riders began to gather, their silhouettes sharp against the fading light. The question she had asked still lingered between them. Will it hurt? Will you be gentle? But now it was no longer only about her. It was about what was coming, about whether love could survive war, about whether trust could stand against bullets and hatred. Thunderhawk turned toward the approaching riders, his body shifting from tenderness to readiness in a single breath. Alawan stood beside him, her white dress glowing faintly in the dusk, a symbol of innocence caught in the crossfire of history. Neither of them imagined how this night would end. Neither of them could see the sacrifice waiting just beyond the ridge. As the first rider charged down the slope and the echo of hooves thundered across the valley, Alawan realized that whatever happened next would not only test her courage, but redefine the meaning of gentleness itself. And somewhere between the sound of gunfire and the beating of her heart, the desert prepared to reveal an ending no one would ever forget. The first rider did not slow as he came down the slope. Dust rose behind him like smoke from a battlefield, and the fading light carved his figure into something hard and dangerous. Alawan felt Thunderhawk shift beside her. His hand released hers, not in rejection but in readiness. The warmth of his touch lingered in her palm like a promise interrupted. The rider pulled his horse to a sharp stop near the riverbank. It was Ironwood Kane. His jaw was tight, his rifle resting across his saddle. Behind him, 3 more men followed, their faces tense with fear disguised as anger. The town had chosen its side without knowing the full story. "Allow and grace," Ironwood called out, his voice cutting through the evening air. "Step away from him." Thunderhawk stood still, tall and steady, a muscular Native American warrior with long black hair and tribal jewelry, always shirtless, with a fit, model-like muscular build, small tribal tattoos, and tribal jewelry around his neck. The fading sun outlined his powerful frame. He did not reach for a weapon. He did not move toward aggression. He simply watched. Elowen's heart pounded in her chest, but she did not step back. The river behind them flowed calmly, as if unaware of the storm gathering at its edge. She could feel 2 histories colliding in that single stretch of land. Frontier law and tribal honor, church bells and drumbeats. Fear and something dangerously close to love. Ironwood's gaze flickered between them, disbelief hardening into something darker. "You don't understand what you're doing," he said. "This is how wars start," Thunderhawk's voice came low and even. "Wars start when men refuse to listen," one of the settlers muttered under his breath, gripping his rifle tighter. The tension thickened, pressing down on everyone like the desert heat before a monsoon. Alawan felt it in her bones. One wrong word could shatter what little balance remained. Before anyone could speak again, a distant horn echoed from the ridge beyond the river. It was not a settler's signal. It was Apache. The sound rolled through the canyon, deep and commanding. Thunderhawk did not turn, but Ilawan saw the change in his eyes. He was no longer only the man who had caught her falling from a runaway horse. He was a leader, bound to his people. She realized then that she knew so little of the full weight he carried. Ironwood heard the horn too. His men shifted uneasily. They had expected to find a secret meeting, not a border of two forces ready to defend their own. "Ilawan," Ironwood said again, softer this time. "Your father is looking for you." The mention of her father struck like a stone to the heart. Gideon Grace was a man of strong faith and stronger pride. He had built the small church with his own hands, believing he was planting civilization in wild land. He had lost his wife to fever years ago, and since then, Ilawan had been his last fragile piece of hope. She imagined him now, pacing the wooden floor of the church, worry etched into his weathered face. Would he see her choice as betrayal, or would he see it as courage? Thunderhawk spoke her name quietly, not as a command, but as a question. "Ilawan Grace." There was concern in his voice, but also respect. He would not decide for her, that was the difference. He never forced her into a corner. Ironwood's horse stamped impatiently. "This ends tonight," he declared. "You cross that river with him, and there's no coming back. The river. That thin, shimmering line that had separated two worlds for as long as anyone could remember. It seemed smaller now, yet heavier with meaning." Another horn call echoed, closer this time. From the far ridge, shadows began to move. Apache riders, silent and watchful, appeared along the high ground. They did not charge. They did not shout. They simply observed. Thunderhawk lifted his chin slightly, a signal that only his people would understand. His posture remained calm, but the air around him felt charged. Ilawan sensed the unspoken command passing between him and the warriors on the ridge. "Hold, wait," Ironwood noticed too. His confidence flickered. He had not come prepared for a standoff of this scale. "Are you planning an attack?" Ironwood demanded. Thunderhawk's eyes remained steady. "I am preventing one." The truth of that statement hung heavy in the air. Ilawan realized that Thunderhawk had likely known this confrontation was coming. Perhaps he had sensed the growing unrest in town. Perhaps he had been trying to shield both sides from exactly this moment. Her thoughts raced back to the past weeks. The secret meetings. The way Thunderhawk sometimes seemed distracted, listening for distant signals she could not hear. The tension in his shoulders when talk of land disputes reached the trading post. There was more happening beneath the surface than she had understood. Ironwood lowered his rifle slightly, but did not relax. "Your people have been moving closer to the valley," he accused. "We follow the buffalo," Thunderhawk replied. "We follow the seasons. The land moves us." The simplicity of his words only frustrated Ironwood further. The sheriff believed in boundaries drawn on paper. Thunderhawk believed in paths drawn by nature. Ilawan stepped forward before fear could stop her. "There has to be another way," she said, her voice trembling but clear. "This does not have to become bloodshed." Both men looked at her. For a brief moment, she felt the weight of being the bridge between them. A preacher's daughter standing beside a warrior. A virgin caught between tradition and transformation. She understood that her choice was no longer only personal. It had become symbolic. The wind picked up, lifting strands of her hair across her face. Thunderhawk reached out instinctively to brush them aside, then paused, remembering the eyes watching them. His hand dropped slowly to his side. That small hesitation hurt more than any shouted threat. From the ridge, a new figure emerged among the Apache riders. He was older, his presence commanding even at a distance. Crimson Volf, elder of the tribe. His gaze settled on Thunderhawk, then shifted to Ilawan. Even across the river, she felt the scrutiny. She was an outsider in both camps now. Ironwood followed her line of sight. "Looks like your chief wants answers too," he said coldly. Thunderhawk's jaw tightened. "Crimson Volf wants peace." But peace cannot survive lies. The word lingered. Lies. Elowen's stomach tightened. What lies? Who had been twisting the truth between town and tribe? She thought of the recent cattle theft rumors, the burned fence line, the accusations thrown without proof. Someone had been feeding the fire from the shadows. Ironwood's eyes narrowed. "Careful, warrior." Thunderhawk met his stare without flinching. "Careful, sheriff." The standoff stretched longer, each second pulling tighter like a rope ready to snap. The desert sky had darkened fully now, stars beginning to pierce the purple veil above. The river reflected them in broken fragments. Ilawan realized that tonight was not the beginning of this conflict. It was only the moment when hidden tensions surfaced. Old American frontier pride clashed with Apache sovereignty. Faith clashed with tradition. Fear clashed with forbidden romance. The settlers slowly turned their horses, retreating up the slope, but their posture promised that this was far from over. On the ridge, Crimson Wolf raised his hand, and the Apache riders melted back into shadow. Ilawan stood between two departing forces, her heart caught in the middle. The night air felt colder now. Thunderhawk stepped closer once the others were gone. His voice softened again, but the weight remained. "Sunrise will test more than courage," she swallowed. "Will you stand there alone?" He studied her face as if memorizing it against the darkness. "I have never been alone." The words carried both comfort and warning. In the distance, church bells began to ring, calling the town to gather. On the ridge, a faint drumbeat answered. Two worlds preparing for morning. Ilawan knew sleep would not come easily. And as she looked from the river to the fading figures of both camps, she felt a chilling truth settle in her heart. By sunrise, secrets would surface. And someone, on one side or the other, would have to pay for them. The night stretched long and restless over the valley. Lanterns burned late in the frontier town, their golden light flickering through wooden windows as worried voices filled the streets. Inside the small church, Gideon Grace stood at the altar, his large hands gripping the edge of the pulpit as if it were the only solid thing left in his world. He had heard the gunshots. He had heard the horn from the ridge. And he had heard whispers of his daughter's name carried through the crowd like smoke. Outside, Ironwood Kane gathered the townsmen near the well. His voice was steady, but beneath it lived a hard edge of pride and fear. He spoke of protection, of land rights, of defending their homes. The words stirred the settlers, but not all of them felt certain. A rancher named Stone Callahan shifted uncomfortably, remembering how Thunderhawk had once returned his lost cattle without asking for payment. Not every story fit the narrative of enemy. Across the river, Apache fires burned in a careful circle beneath the dark sky. Crimson Wolf sat near the center, his lined face thoughtful. Around him stood warriors, including Thunderhawk, who remained silent while others debated. Some demanded strength, others urged caution. The buffalo herds had moved closer to the valley this season, and hunger made tempers sharp. But Crimson Wolf knew something deeper threatened them: rumors, broken trust. Someone was pushing the two sides toward conflict. Thunderhawk listened, his powerful frame outlined by firelight. A muscular Native American warrior with long black hair and tribal jewelry, always shirtless, with a fit, model-like muscular build, small tribal tattoos, and tribal jewelry around his neck. He carried both authority and restraint. The younger warriors watched him closely. They respected his courage, but they questioned his connection to the preacher's daughter. When the council quieted, Crimson Wolf spoke. "The river is restless. The wind carries false words. We must learn who benefits from this storm." Thunderhawk nodded once. His thoughts were not only on strategy. They were on Ilawan Grace. He understood the risk she had taken by standing beside him at the riverbank. In the eyes of her town, she had already crossed a line. Ilawan lay awake in her small bedroom above the church. The wooden ceiling felt lower than ever, the air heavy. Through her window she could see the faint glow of Apache fires beyond the ridge. She pressed her fingers to her lips, remembering how close Thunderhawk had stood, how his voice had softened when he said her name. Her father entered quietly, though his boots were heavy against the floor. Gideon Grace was a man of faith, but tonight his faith was strained. He sat beside her bed without speaking at first. "Ilawan," he said finally, his voice low. "Tell me the truth." She sat up slowly, meeting his gaze. There was no anger in his eyes yet, only fear. Fear of losing her. Fear of losing control over a world already slipping through his hands. "I met him by the canyon weeks ago," she admitted. "He helped me." Gideon's jaw tightened. "Help can become influence." "He has done nothing dishonorable," she said firmly. Her father stood, pacing once across the room. "You do not understand the danger." Ironwood believes the Apache are preparing to claim this valley. If something happens tomorrow, and you are seen as tied to them, the town will not forgive. She felt the weight of that truth. Reputation in a frontier town was fragile. A woman's virtue was discussed more than her courage. Yet her heart refused to see Thunderhawk as a threat. "I am not ashamed," she whispered. Gideon stopped pacing. He looked at her not as a preacher, but as a father who had already buried one love in his lifetime. "You may not be ashamed," he said softly, "but the world can still be cruel." Outside, Ironwood Kane rode alone to the edge of town where the fences had burned days earlier. The charred wood stood like blackened bones against the moonlight. He crouched, examining the ground. The tracks were confusing. Not clearly Apache, not clearly settler. He had ignored that detail before, too focused on quick blame. A shadow moved behind him. It was Silas Crow, a trader who often moved between town and tribal lands. Silas carried a reputation for charm and profit. He tipped his hat casually. "Trouble sleeping, Sheriff." Ironwood stood slowly. "What do you know about this, Silas?" Silas shrugged. "Only that conflict can be good for certain businesses, weapons, supplies, land sales." Ironwood's eyes narrowed. "Careful." Silas smiled faintly. "Just saying sometimes fear is more profitable than peace." The words lingered after Silas walked away. Ironwood felt an unease he could not explain. What if the tension had been fed deliberately? Back at the Apache camp, Thunderhawk stepped away from the council fire and walked toward the river alone. The night air cooled his skin. He crouched at the water's edge, watching the current move steadily despite human conflict. He thought of Eloin's question, "Will it hurt? Will you be gentle?" He understood that her innocence was not weakness. It was bravery in a world that punished vulnerability. Behind him, a younger warrior named Red Talon approached. "You care for her?" Red Talon said bluntly. Thunderhawk did not deny it. "I respect her." Red Talon crossed his arms. "Respect does not change how her people see us." Thunderhawk stood, meeting his gaze. "Nor does hatred protect our children." Red Talon looked away, unsettled by the truth. As midnight passed, clouds began to gather over the valley. A storm threatened at the horizon, low thunder rolling faintly. Nature itself seemed to mirror the rising conflict. In town, Stone Callahan sat at his kitchen table, staring at a folded letter. It was a land offer from an Eastern investor, promising wealth if the valley could be secured free of tribal claims. Stone realized that powerful interests far beyond their small settlement might be involved. The frontier was not only about survival anymore, it was about ownership. He folded the letter carefully and slipped it into his coat. Tomorrow at sunrise he would watch Ironwood closely. Eloin could not bear the silence of her room any longer. She slipped outside into the cool night, walking toward the river path. The church bells were quiet now, but the tension still hummed in the air. Halfway down the path, she stopped. A figure stepped from the shadows. It was Silas Crow. "You should not wander alone tonight," Silas said smoothly. She felt uneasy around him. His eyes carried calculation rather than conviction. "I am not afraid." "You should be," he replied lightly. "These are dangerous times." Before she could respond, another presence emerged behind Silas. Thunderhawk stepped into the moonlight, his posture protective. The tribal jewelry at his neck caught the pale glow. His expression was calm, but there was warning in his stance. Silas raised his hand slightly. "No harm meant?" Thunderhawk's voice was quiet. "Then walk away." Silas studied them both, something thoughtful flickering in his gaze. "Sunrise will be interesting," he said before retreating into darkness. Eloin released a breath she had not realized she was holding. Thunderhawk turned to her, concern etched across his strong features. "You should not be here," he said gently. "Neither should you," she answered. For a moment the world shrank to just the two of them. The river whispered beside them. The storm clouds thickened overhead. "I fear tomorrow is larger than us," she admitted. Thunderhawk stepped closer, his presence steady and grounding. "Sometimes storms reveal truth," she searched his eyes. "And if the truth destroys everything—" He hesitated just slightly. "Then we stand in it together." Lightning flickered faintly in the distance, illuminating the valley for a brief second. In that flash, Eloin saw how fragile the peace truly was. settlers guarding their homes. Apache defending ancestral land. Greed moving quietly beneath the surface. A forbidden romance caught between duty and desire. The first drops of rain began to fall, cool against her skin. Somewhere beyond the ridge, horses shifted uneasily. In town, Ironwood stared toward the dark clouds with troubled eyes. And Silas Crow watched from a hidden vantage point, a slow smile touching his lips. By sunrise, every hidden motive would begin to surface. And the valley would not be the same again. The storm did not break fully in the night, but it left the air thick and electric. By the time the first light of dawn touched the Arizona frontier, the valley felt as if it were holding its breath. Low clouds hovered over the river, and the red cliffs looked darker, heavier, like silent witnesses waiting for judgment. Elau and Grace stood outside the church as the sunrise painted the sky in pale gold. She had not slept. Her white dress had been replaced with a simple blue one, practical and modest, yet her hands trembled as if she were walking toward something far greater than a town meeting. The church bell rang once, deep and steady, echoing across the valley. From the opposite side, Apache riders appeared along the ridge as the light grew stronger. They did not rush. They moved with quiet strength, descending toward the riverbank where the meeting had been declared. At their center rode Thunder Hawk, a muscular Native American warrior with long black hair and tribal jewelry, always shirtless, with a fit, model-like muscular build, small tribal tattoos, and tribal jewelry around his neck. The early sun caught against the metal and beads at his chest, making him look almost carved from bronze and fire. Behind Alawan, the townspeople gathered. Ironwood Kane stood at the front, rifle slung over his shoulder but not raised. Stone Callahan lingered a few steps back, his expression conflicted. Gideon Grace emerged from the church doors, his black coat stark against the brightening morning. He looked older than he had the day before. The river flowed between them like a line drawn by fate. Crimson Wolf stepped forward from the Apache side. His presence commanded respect without force. His silver-streaked hair moved gently in the breeze, and his eyes scanned the settlers with measured calm. Thunder Hawk remained at his side, silent but alert. Ironwood crossed the shallow water first, boots splashing lightly. After a tense moment, Crimson Wolf and Thunder Hawk stepped forward to meet him at the center of the riverbank. The symbolism was not lost on anyone. "We are here to speak," Crimson Wolf said in steady English. "Not to fight?" Ironwood nodded once. "Then let's speak clearly." The tension between them felt sharp enough to cut. Alawan stood close enough to hear, though far enough to avoid drawing immediate attention. Her heart pounded each time Thunder Hawk shifted his weight, each time Ironwood's jaw tightened. Stone Callahan suddenly stepped forward, his voice louder than expected. "Sheriff, before we go further, there's something you need to see." All eyes turned to him. Stone reached into his coat and pulled out the folded letter from the Eastern Investor. He handed it to Ironwood, who read quickly, his brow furrowing deeper with each line. "What is this?" Ironwood demanded. Stone swallowed. "It's an offer for land rights. It only stands if Apache claims are cleared out." A ripple moved through the settlers. Whispered words. Confusion. Suspicion. Crimson Wolf watched silently, but Thunderhawk's gaze sharpened. "Who sent it?" he asked. Stone shook his head. "A company back east." But the letter came through Silas Crow. At the mention of that name, several townspeople shifted uneasily. Ilawan felt a chill run through her despite the warming sun. As if summoned by his own shadow, Silas Crow appeared from behind the crowd, dressed neatly, his smile calm and unreadable. "Now, let's not jump to conclusions," he said smoothly. "Business is business. Expansion is natural. Progress requires space. Space that is not yours," Thunderhawk replied, his voice firm. Silas met his gaze without flinching. "Land becomes property when it is claimed and developed." Crimson Wolf stepped forward slightly. "This land was claimed long before your maps were drawn," the settlers murmured again. Some nodded in reluctant agreement. Others looked unsure. The idea that outside investors might be fueling their fear unsettled them more than the presence of Apache warriors. Ironwood lowered the letter slowly. His expression shifted from anger to something more complicated. "You've been pushing this," he said to Silas. Silas lifted his hands in a harmless gesture. "I have been offering opportunity." Ilawan felt courage rise within her like a tide. She stepped forward before doubt could stop her. "Opportunity for who?" she asked clearly. "For the town? Or for yourself?" Silas's eyes flickered toward her, briefly cold. "You should be careful, Miss Grace." Thunderhawk took a half-step closer to her, not touching, but near enough to shield if needed. The protective stance did not go unnoticed by either side. The wind picked up again, carrying dust across the riverbank. The storm clouds had not fully cleared, and distant thunder rolled faintly across the horizon. Ironwood faced Silas squarely. "Did you burn the fences?" Silas's smile thinned. "That is a serious accusation," Stone stepped in. "The tracks didn't match Apache patterns." "I checked," more murmurs. Doubt spread quickly once planted. Thunderhawk's voice remained calm, but there was steel beneath it. "You wanted settlers afraid, you wanted Apache blamed. Fear drives men to sign papers." Silas's composure began to crack. "And what of your growing numbers near the valley?" "Your hunters crossing closer each week," Crimson Wolf answered evenly. "The buffalo moved?" "We followed food, not war." The simplicity of that truth hung heavy. Ilawan's gaze moved between the men. She realized that the conflict had never truly been about romance or personal betrayal. It was about land, power, and control. She felt anger now, not fear. Ironwood turned to the gathered townspeople. "If we were pushed toward violence for someone else's gain, then we need to rethink what we are doing." The Apache warriors remained watchful on the ridge, their silhouettes strong against the sky. The settlers shifted uneasily, uncertainty replacing certainty. Silas stepped backward slightly, calculating. "You cannot stop progress," he said quietly. Thunderhawk's eyes held steady fire. Progress built on lies collapses. The air felt charged again, not with immediate violence but with exposure. Truth was surfacing, and it was dangerous. Suddenly, a loud crack echoed from the far side of the valley, not gunfire. A section of old wooden bridge near the trading post gave way under the weight of loose planks soaked by the night storm, horses startled. People turned sharply, panic flashing for a moment. In that chaos, Silas moved. He lunged toward the edge of the riverbank where a satchel lay hidden beneath brush. Thunderhawk reacted instantly, sprinting forward with powerful strides. The settlers shouted. Apache warriors shifted on the ridge. Silas grabbed the satchel, but before he could flee, Thunderhawk blocked his path. The two men faced each other, tension sharp and immediate. Silas's eyes were no longer smooth and charming. They were desperate. "You have no idea what stands behind this deal," Silas hissed. Thunderhawk's voice was low and controlled. "I know enough." Ironwood rushed forward with Stone at his side. Gideon Grace followed, though more slowly. Ilawan's heart raced as she watched Thunderhawk stand firm, protective not only of her now, but of the fragile chance for peace. The storm clouds above finally split with a loud crack of thunder, rain beginning to fall in sudden heavy drops. The river swelled slightly under the downpour, reflecting the chaos of the moment. Silas clutched the satchel tighter. "This valley will be taken one way or another." Thunderhawk did not move. Not today. The rain soaked everyone quickly, washing dust from faces, blurring the sharp lines between settler and Apache. For a brief second they all stood under the same sky, equally drenched, equally human. Ilawan stepped closer despite the danger, her voice rising above the rain. "This ends now." All eyes turned to her. The tension reached its highest point, balanced on a razor's edge. Silas's grip tightened. Ironwood raised his hand, unsure whether to signal arrest or restraint. Crimson Wolf watched with deep, calculating calm. Thunderhawk stood between greed and community, between conflict and possibility. The rain poured harder, thunder shaking the valley. In that charged moment, with love, land, and loyalty hanging in the balance, the future of the frontier waited on a single choice. Rain poured down in heavy sheets, turning dust into mud and anger into raw confusion. Thunderhawk stood firm in front of Silas Crow, his powerful frame unshaken despite the storm. A muscular Native American warrior with long black hair and tribal jewelry, always shirtless, with a fit, model-like muscular build, small tribal tattoos, and tribal jewelry around his neck, he looked less like a symbol of conflict and more like a guardian of balance. Silas's grip on the satchel trembled. The smooth charm he once carried had washed away with the rain. Ironwood Kane stepped closer, boots sinking into the wet ground, his expression no longer fueled by blind suspicion but by clarity. "Open it," Ironwood ordered. Silas hesitated. Thunderhawk did not touch him, yet his presence made escape impossible. Finally, with a sharp breath, Silas dropped the satchel into the mud. Stone Callahan bent down, opening it carefully. Inside were maps, signed agreements, and advance payments from the Eastern Land Company. Documents detailing forced removal plans. Plans that would have pushed Apache families from ancestral land and manipulated settlers into conflict. A heavy silence followed. Gideon Gray stepped forward, rain running down his weathered face. He looked from the papers to the Apache elders, then to his daughter. For the first time he saw the full truth. The valley had not been on the brink of war because of culture or romance. It had been pushed there by greed. Ironwood exhaled slowly. "You played us all." Silas's eyes darted around, searching for allies. He found none. Even the settlers who once nodded at his talk of progress now looked at him with anger. "I was offering prosperity," Silas insisted weakly. "Prosperity built on lies," Crimson Wolf said calmly. The rain softened slightly, as if the storm itself was easing with the truth laid bare. Ironwood turned to Stone. "Gather the men. Silas Crow will answer for this." Silas was escorted back toward town, not with violence, but with firm resolve. The immediate threat dissolved, yet the deeper wounds remained. Suspicion does not vanish in a single morning. It takes time to heal. Thunderhawk remained where he stood, water streaming down his strong shoulders. His eyes searched for Alowan Grace. She stepped forward slowly, her dress soaked, her hair clinging to her face. For a moment the world narrowed again to just the two of them. The river flowed steadily beside them, no longer a dividing line but a shared horizon. Ironwood cleared his throat. "Crimson Wolf," he said carefully, "we owe your people an apology." Murmurs spread through the settlers, but no one objected. The evidence was undeniable. Crimson Wolf inclined his head. "Peace is stronger than pride." Gideon Gray stepped beside his daughter. His voice was steady though thick with emotion. "I preached about truth every Sunday," he said quietly. "Yet I failed to see it in front of me." Alowan looked at her father with hope rather than fear. "It is not too late." He studied Thunderhawk, truly studied him. Not as an enemy, but as a man. Strength, honor, restraint. "You protected her," Gideon said. Thunderhawk met his gaze. "She protects herself." A faint smile touched Gideon's lips. Respect passed between them, fragile but real. Ironwood addressed both sides. "We cannot undo what has been stirred up, but we can choose what happens next. No more rumors, no more outside manipulation. We meet openly from now on, settlers and Apache." Crimson Wolf nodded. "We share the valley. We share responsibility." Stone Callahan stepped forward. "The Eastern Company will not stop easily. But if we stand together, they will think twice before interfering again." The rain faded to a light drizzle. Clouds parted slowly, revealing streaks of sunlight breaking through. The storm that had threatened destruction now felt like a cleansing. Thunderhawk turned to Alowan, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "You stood in the storm." "So did you," she replied. He lifted a hand this time without hesitation, brushing damp strands of hair from her face. The gesture was gentle, natural, no longer hidden by fear of watching eyes. The valley had seen enough truth for one day. Weeks passed, and the frontier town began to change. Meetings were held by the river rather than behind closed doors. Trade routes were re-established with fairness instead of suspicion. The buffalo migration was discussed openly so settlers could adjust grazing plans. Trust grew slowly, like new grass after rain. Silas Crow was sent east under guard to answer for his schemes. The land company withdrew its immediate claim when faced with united resistance. The valley was no longer easy prey. Gideon Gray surprised many by inviting Crimson Wolf to speak at the church. The gathering was not a sermon, but a conversation. Stories were shared about ancestry, faith, and survival. Some hearts softened, others took longer. But seeds of respect had been planted. Alowan and Thunderhawk continued to meet by the river, though no longer in secrecy. Their love story became something larger than whispered scandal. It became a symbol of reconciliation. There were still challenges. Cultural differences did not disappear overnight. Yet they faced them with honesty rather than fear. One evening, as the sun set in brilliant shades of orange and red, Thunderhawk stood with Alawan at the same riverbank where she had once asked her trembling question. "Will it hurt?" she said softly, recalling her first fear. He smiled faintly. "Growth can hurt. And will you be gentle?" His eyes held warmth and certainty. "Always." She understood now that gentleness was not weakness. It was strength guided by respect. The Arizona frontier had tested them with conflict, greed, and misunderstanding. But it had also revealed courage, loyalty, and the power of standing together. Ironwood Kane adjusted his role from rigid sheriff to balanced mediator. Stone Callahan became a bridge between ranchers and tribal hunters. Crimson Wolf guided his people with renewed confidence in shared agreements. And Gideon Grace learned that faith grows deeper when it listens. As the seasons shifted, the valley transformed from a place of tension into a place of cautious harmony. Children from both sides played near the river under watchful but less fearful eyes. Trade flourished honestly. Drum beats and church bells no longer sounded like warnings to one another, but like different songs carried by the same wind. Thunderhawk remained a powerful presence in the valley, a muscular Native American warrior with long black hair and tribal jewelry. Always shirtless, with a fit, model-like muscular build, small tribal tattoos, and tribal jewelry around his neck, yet now he was also known for his wisdom and diplomacy. His strength had protected more than land. It had protected the possibility of peace. Alawan Grace stood beside him not as a naive girl torn between worlds, but as a woman who chose courage over fear. Her innocence had evolved into resilience. Her love had become a bridge rather than a dividing line. The Arizona sunset glowed warmly over the river, reflecting gold across the water. The land that once seemed ready for war now carried a quieter promise, not perfection. Not a fairy tale without struggle, but a frontier where truth overcame manipulation and where two cultures learned that coexistence was stronger than conquest. And as Thunderhawk's hand closed around Alawan's, firm and gentle all at once, the valley breathed easier under the wide American sky, proving that even in the wildest lands, love and honor can carve out a lasting peace.